Hey, what's going on there, everybody? So I look a little bit different than what you're usually used to with my typical white trash look. Usually I'm never really fixed up for the camera and I just kind of put my headset on and go. But I'm actually going to be going to my local club here pretty soon. I'm partying it up, as they say. I thought this would be a perfect opportunity for me to explain myself as to how and why I got into the alternative scene, and how it was the perfect match for me in terms of the music. I'm very heavily involved with the music. I have a strong passion for the music in terms of the alternative scene, and what we are referring to when we say alternative scene, we're talking about your typical goth rock, death rock, new wave, post-punk, synth pop, alternative 80s, you name it. Industrial, dark wave, etc. Like, there's so many different genres when we're talking about the alternative scene here, but mainly specifically the 80s part of it, that part of the aspect of it. So I guess I could go ahead and get right into this, guys. So I would post pictures of what my parents used to look like when they were young goths, as you want to call it. But I'm sure they probably wouldn't appreciate that, but my parents used to be old OG 90s goth when they were growing up as kids, and they used to go to the typical thing, go to the cemetery, take photos and things like that. Much of that changes as you get older and you don't really do things like that anymore, but so growing up as a kid, I used to always go on road trips with my mother. We used to go to Yosemite National Park, where she would play a lot of the alternative 80s. When we talk about alternative 80s, probably a lot more of the obscure bands, such as the Payolas, you guys may or may not have heard of, or the Fix, or Alphaville, which most people are familiar with Alphaville with Forever Young as the song. But let's see here. Mainly specifically though, big in Japan, that would be one of her favorites that she used to always play by them when we go to Yosemite National Park. So growing up, when I got into my elementary years, I actually took on much of my father's side. He kind of phased out of the whole goth thing and got more into heavy metal, and I took more. I grew more towards the heavy metal side of his music. However, it was more of a phase during my 4th through like 6th grade, and then that's where I kind of lost touch of who I was. And then, of course, I think many of us all had an emo scene about us. We all had that little emo strike in us, and for whatever reason, I got into that for a little while, and I always thought that the style looked cool, but the music was fucking awful, and I never got into the music aspect of it, but I kind of liked and digged the aesthetic of the emo scene. So I rocked that for probably up until my sophomore year, and then, once my sophomore year came along, that's when I really discovered who I was and what I was more interested in terms of the music, and it turned out to be, well, the alternative scene, the very thing I hated. If I didn't mention that, I did not like the 80s when I was growing up as a kid. I hated it, and then I don't know what happened. And my sophomore year, I decided I was really drawn to the 80s, and I really liked the electronic synth noise that a lot of the 80s brings, the way that it's produced. And I got really heavily involved with it. I would look up bands, your typical, Depeche Mode, Tears for Fears, The Cure, especially old Cure though, old Robert Smith. We're talking about the album Pornography. I hate much of Robert Smith's newer shit. I don't really care much for it. But Pornography is a fantastic album. I still swear by that album, and hopefully one day he'll come back and reproduce something similar. But I guess you would consider that more goth rock when we're talking about old Robert Smith here. But I would also listen to more death rock too at this time. I was getting mainly more heavily involved with the death rock scene. I would listen to things like Tragic Black, and of course, we can't forget Christian Death. Christian Death was, that's almost like a starter band for many people getting into the alternative scene, especially death rock. not I don't really much care for much Christian death. It's like Spiritual Cramp, and that's kind of it. There's not a whole lot that I really care when it comes to Roz Williams music. But you have to learn to appreciate founders and things like that when it comes to the alternative scene. I may not like Bill Murray, or you guys also may know Bajas as it's referred to as, but I never really cared for Bajas. I can't say I will ever care for Bajas, but a lot of people like Bajas or Bauhaus, however you want to pronounce it. But you have to respect founders when it comes to the alternative scene, because without them, we probably would not have the music that we have today. So yeah, my sophomore year, that's when I really got heavily involved into the alternative scene at this time, and growing up, I would start looking up more indie bands. Once I got out of high school, that's when I really started digging deeper, more deeper than many of these DJs do at clubs, and that was an insult, by the way. And actually looking into the music and seeing what kind of other music is out there in terms of production. And you'll find a lot of good music out there. It's not just Sisters of Mercy, it's not just Skinny Puppy. There's a lot of indie bands that are coming out nowadays that are producing some really good shit. My favorite genre probably in the alternative scene has probably got to be darkwave. Darkwave is kind of like a melodic dark synth that has a really great beat to it, and especially with the flow of the lyrics and the voice, the vocals that go behind it, just amazing. One band in particular that I can name that has a great voice and great synth noise would probably be Brandy Kills. They're an indie darkwave band that has kind of emerged from Russia. I would totally love to fly out to Russia to go see them and support them. They're like my favorite all-time darkwave band. But yeah, guys, if you guys ever get into the alternative scene, don't limit yourself to just the old school bands out there. Like, again, Sisters of Mercy, Skinny Puppy, and those are just the two I can name off the top of my head. I have so many artists that I can't tell every single one of them. Or even Ministry. A lot of people like the newer Ministry. Back in the day, Al Jorgensen, he used to produce a synth pop album, which was with Sympathy, but he likes to act like that album never really existed because he's such a hardcore industrial guy now, and he doesn't really do synth pop anymore. I never cared for his newer industrial shit. I always just loved With Sympathy, and that's kind of where I leave it at when it comes to Ministry. But yeah, I mean, there's not really much else to say other than I will definitely have more videos. This is more of just an introduction to how I got into the alternative scene, but I will also talk about my experiences in the alternative scene in terms of these clubs and things like that in another video, mainly talking about the political side of it. So if you guys don't want to, I know a lot of people get touchy when it comes to politics, but I feel like I have to voice my opinion on this because it is kind of important when we are talking about the alternative scene and how it can really damage the scene itself. I mean, we're talking political retards, we're talking about elitism, and that kind of stuff when we're talking about the alternative scene and how it's creating a toxic environment. But again, that will be for another video. But yeah, I just wanted to leave it off on a positive note that the alternative scene is always warm, welcoming to any race, ethnicity. It's for pretty much everybody that loves the dark aspect of the scene. And it doesn't have to just be goth or dark or whatever the hell you want to call it. The alternativeness is also in the 80s too, and that's what I was saying. Like, you had a lot of synth pop bands that weren't really much recognized in the 80s, but created great 80s tunes. Like I was mentioning, like the Paolos and the Fix. I would definitely check them out. I don't feel like they were very big back in the 80s, as they kind of are now, because everybody loves the 80s now, so they get more picked up and recognized nowadays. Which is better than nothing, I guess. But yeah, if you guys ever want to get into the alternative scene, I would highly recommend it. It is probably the 80s itself. Honestly, we haven't had anything like the 80s, and I think that's why, even for me as a younger dude, really appreciates the 80s, because nothing in terms of music today, I believe, has captured many people's hearts in terms of the music. We haven't had a renaissance in music since the 80s, and I highly believe that. Who knows? We may never have another renaissance in music in terms of my lifetime, and maybe even my kids' lifetime. I don't know. But the 80s, you can't beat the 80s. It's like it has an iconic sound, and it's very has a great beat that you can actually shake your ass to, as they say. But yeah, guys, I would definitely get into the alternative scene if you ever like a lot of that kind of stuff. But that's just my opinion. If you guys have any questions, thoughts, or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. And I would like to hear what you guys think, if you guys are actually into the alternative scene too, and what your experiences are. Again, I will make another video in terms of the political side and all that kind of stuff, and voice my opinions on that kind of stuff. But anyways, guys, I hope you had a good one, and be sure you don't get caught by the killer. See you later, guys. Peace out.